What's happening, family? Dr. Joe here. Hope each of you are well and blessed. You see what we're dealing with, the sacredness of sex. What does this have to do with lifestyle? What does this have to do with nutrition? What does this have to do with health and wellness? It has everything to do with it. The very nature of sex was a creation by God given to human beings. And the nature of sex, when it happens, is it attaches the souls of two individuals. When you think about it, the formation of sex was integral to the nature of how man and woman were even created. God made the man. God made the woman from the man. This is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And the two come together to create one. So it is the expression of sex with man and woman that attaches those two, that the manifestation can be what God put into order, that men and women were not designed to compete with each other, but to complete each other. And the two became one. The mechanism of the twain becoming singular or monolithic happens through the act of sex. So what happens when we are functioning via a sacred act casually or topically? What's happening is we are binding together things that aren't meant to be bound. We are joining together, things that don't need to be joined. So as we live in this, in Babylon, in this secular nihilistic society, this anti-God, this anti-morals, this anti-ethics, this anti-tradition, and we are engaging with people frequently, lustfully, casually, we cease to understand that sexual experience is a sacred one. Although you may not view it as a sacred act, it still is. And there are spiritual manifestations that are happening that we may be ignorant to or unaware of, but we can still see how it impacts our lives. The more and more sexual partners a person has, the more they're spiritually compromised, the more neurotic they become, the more paranoid they become, the more confused they become, all whilst not understanding that the reason for this state of confusion and this state of chaos is a byproduct of this sacred act that has been used topically, lustfully, to bind and join things that weren't meant to be bound. The first thing that happens in this lustful type of sex, to where we bastardize the sacredness of sex, is the pollution of the soul. All right. The more sexual partners a man has, the more his soul is polluted. The more sexual partners a woman has, her soul is polluted, but it's polluted in a different way because we're anatomically different. As a man has sex with a woman, he's entering, he's trespassing, he's taking, he's absorbing souls and spirits, becoming confused, becoming divided, becoming unable to be satisfied by one. As a woman gives herself in sex, she is allowing her body to be trespassed. She's allowing someone to enter. So as that happens, she's giving. The man is taking. The woman is giving. The more sexual partners a woman has, the more of her value is diminished. The more of her essence is given away. The more of who she is reduced, which is why a lot of times promiscuous females can act masculine in their nature, because the essence of their femininity has been polluted and corrupted by this bastardized act that mitigates the sacredness of sex. All right. Number two, when we involve ourselves in these acts, we allow people to occupy the real estate of our souls. There are people right now, you're thinking about them. You haven't seen them in years. You haven't been around them in years. You try your best not to think of them, but they're still there because the act of sex binds things. It merges things. It brings things together. And as we casually involve ourselves in this sacred act, we're binding ourselves to people that we may not want occupying the real estate of our soul. But lastly, when we bastardize the sacredness of sex, we provide entry points of demonic entities. What's the best way for first of all, a demon and a spirit can never come to you and knock down the door. A doorway, a pathway has to be provided. This is one of the limitations of the enemy. That if you've ever read the Bible, you'll see it. That all the way in the inception of the Bible in Genesis, when the serpent showed up in the Garden of Eden, the serpent did not make Eve and Adam partake of anything. The serpent had to finesse Adam and Eve. The first finesser was the serpent. The serpent said, hey, why don't you partake of the tree of knowledge? Eve said, no, God told us not to. The serpent lied and said, oh, don't worry about that. God doesn't want you to partake of the tree of knowledge because if you do, ye shall be gods, knowing the difference between good and evil. It was a finesse. That's what the enemy does, is take the word of God and convolutes it and confuses it, makes it sound right, but it's really a lie. And that's why the way God knew that Adam and Eve went against his word is because they realized they were naked. They had partaken of this forbidden tree of knowledge. So they had a sense of understanding that they did not know before. What's the point? The point is the enemy, if it's on the inside of your house, you let him in. If it's on the inside of your school, you let him in. If it's on the inside of your life, you let him in. And as we indulge in the casualness of sex, whatever demons the person we're sleeping with has are going to be ours. Whatever strongholds are in that person's life can be exposed to us. So in this subject matter of health and wellness and living healthily and being a best version of ourselves, we can't just sit up here and put greens and plants and healthy things in our bodies while exposing our souls to rot and decay. We'll see you on the next one.